futility forever, that I'll read the summary so that we get the sense of continuity. Okay. So as soon as Archana comes on the line, we will start. We are only 3 of us on the line now. Sunki, Yasmin and me. Usually Archana comes online. Yeah. Tanjali is in Europe. Okay. And sometimes Tati also joins. We'll wait for Archana. 7:51. So if she doesn't join in the next 1 or 2 minutes, we'll start. Yeah, the recording has started. There she is. Good morning, Archana.
Good morning, Rangadhar. Good morning. I was a bit late.
Yeah, no problem. We were waiting for you. Now
yes, Rangadhar.
Now we will start. So, Archana, I was saying that we are on page 1399, but for the continuity, I'll just tell you the summary of what he said in the previous para. Okay? And then.
Rangadhar.
Yeah, tell me.
Sorry to disturb. We had to complete the last 10 lines of that paragraph. We hadn't completed it.
That's right. I know that. Yeah. So that's why I will read out for the continuity. I'll read out the summary of the previous one, and then we'll pick up from "we can indeed" or something.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So what he has said in the previous paragraph, this truth of the individuality and of the commonality, we discussed commonality, remember, something which is common to all. In every species, there is a commonness of what is called the, you can't make it, you can always distinguish between a cat and a dog. So the catness that is there is the commonality, and the dogness that is there is the dog. You can't mistake the two. So there is something common, but on the other hand, each cat is different. Okay, is an individual, psychologically different as well as physically also different. So that this truth of the individuality, of commonality, and the third truth that contains both, that's the third level, becomes clearer as we rise in the scale of consciousness. We realize, just 1 second, I have to, yeah, so we realize, clearer as we realize the truth of the distinctions, just 1 second, yeah, we realize the truth of distinctions and differences, but also their limits. Plant life, plant, animal and man are all different, but a deeper, sharper look shows that plant is animal in the making, that animal is on the way to becoming man, that man is really animal but with something extra in him, that man is potential God. Each of these is eternal in his evolutionary steps, but concealed and in the process of revealing himself. Man himself is all his past and contains all potentiality of the future. He is the individual yet represents mankind. To understand him fully, we have to see his individuality, his commonality, and his essential truth that he is. All three elements are to be taken together and none rejected. That's what said this. Okay, so that we discussed also if you see only the one aspect in this life, you can't understand. You have to see also what happened in the previous life. I gave you the example, if you remember, of that man who committed suicide in Mare Garden, and Parichandra, who was a fine sadhak, got puzzled and he referred to mother. And mother said, there's nothing to do with this life, it is old life. Because once you commit suicide, there's a tendency to do that again and again, sometimes without any reason. Okay? Or there is an apparent reason, but the real reason is in the previous life. So this is what he has said in the previous para. So now we go back to where we, so 399, and we are in the third line of page 399. Okay. So we can indeed follow the opposite method of breaking up all things and refusing to look at them as a whole and in relation to that which justifies them, and so create an intellectual conception of absolute evil, absolute injustice, the absolute hideousness, painfulness, triviality, vulgarity, or vanity of all things. This is what happens when you are in the normal consciousness of the ignorance. When you see multiplicity, you see falsehood around you, and you can conceive of something which is absolutely true. You can see injustice along, how the slaves are treated, how the Dalits are treated, and you can think of a absolutely perfect justice. You can think about it. That's what Sridhar is saying. So create an intellectual conception of absolute evil, absolute injustice, okay, absolute hideousness, painfulness, triviality, vulgarity, or vanity of all things. But that is to pursue to its extreme the method of the ignorance, whose view is based upon division. It is not absolutely true. That's what Sridhar is saying. We cannot rightly so deal with the divine workings. We can't say that everything in the physical world is, there is an absolute opposite of the divine here. Because he is lurking, he is hiding in every form. Because the absolute expresses itself through relativities, the secret of which we find it difficult to fathom, because to our limited view, everything appears to be a purposeless play of oppositions and negatives, or a mass of contradictions. We cannot conclude that our first limited view is right, or that all is a vain delusion of the mind and has no reality. Now we'll look at that sentence again and identify the phrases. Okay? We cannot rightly so deal with the divine workings. Very clear statement. If your mental values are not absolutely correct. Okay. There is a certain truth to them, but it is relative. But because the absolute expresses itself through relativities, the absolute is the supermind, and when it manifests, the one becomes the many, and the many become only the outer forms, and the essence is hidden inside. Okay? The relativities, the secret of which we find it difficult to fathom. We cannot see the essence of things when we are in a normal mortal consciousness. Because to our limited view, everything appears to be a purposeless play of oppositions and negatives, or a mass of contradictions. This is what the existentialist philosophy says. You can do nothing about it. This is the nature of the world. Okay? It is because of our limited view. There is purposeless play. What is the point? There is truth and there is falsehood. There is cruelty and there is kindness. All these things are opposites, and there doesn't seem to be any purpose to it. Okay? You have to accept it calmly and quietly as best as you can. The existentialists, okay, and negatives, and or a mass of contradictions. We cannot conclude that our first limited view is right, and that all is a vain delusion of the mind and has no reality. Now he is referring to the ascetic view, the Mayavadan view. Oh, there is no meaning here. Therefore, everything is a delusion of the mind and has no reality. That's what the ascetic is saying. Both the views are wrong. Okay. Nor can we solve all by an original unreconciled contradiction, which is to explain all the rest. Nor can we solve all by an original unreconciled contradiction, which is to explain all the rest. What's he saying? He is saying that even when you go to a higher level of consciousness, you see the one and the many, you see spirit and you see matter, but it is unreconciled. So the solution to the problem of the world, all the problems that you have, can be solved only at the third level. That is why they spent all their life trying to pull down the third level. Okay. That humanity will benefit if they do that, and that's what they did. That can be the most unselfish act, spiritually speaking. Mother had to suffer so much for her body. Okay. She had to suffer tremendously. We could hear her groaning with pain. Okay. After the 1970s, okay, it was tremendous. You could really feel she is there on the third floor, but we are there in the ashram courtyard and we could hear that. But she is doing the divine work and she is letting her body suffer. Okay? So, because the work that they were doing is for humanity and not for themselves. They cared very little for their own condition and their own suffering. We are doing it for mankind and for God. So, we cannot conclude that our first limited view is right or that all is a vain delusion of the mind and there is no reality. Nor can we solve all by an original unreconciled contradiction. This is what happens when you go to the self, no? Which is to explain all the rest. The human reason is wrong in attaching a separate and definitive value to each contradiction by itself or getting rid of one by altogether denying the other. This is what the ascetic does and what the materialist does. Okay. They are both right in their own way and wrong in the other way. In refusing to accept as final and the last word, the coupling of contradictions which have in no way been reconciled together or have not found their source and significance in something beyond their opposition. Which is the source and the something beyond their opposition? The supermind. There has been a recognition of this plane of consciousness in the past, but there was no attempt to bring it down, not even in the Gita. Okay, the Gita clearly, the exposition of the philosophy of Gita, Mother also has said. Yesterday only we were talking about it, that she says it is supramental, but there was no attempt to bring it down, and that's what Mother and Swayanbu did. Okay, because then the problems in the physical world will rise to the next level, to the higher level, where things will become clearer. That is what they have done. Okay, so to summarize what he is saying, we'll have a quick look at what he is saying. Okay. So, in practical life, we have to see the truth of unity, of the difference and the oneness. We have to see. We have necessarily to act according to whether a thing is good or bad, beautiful or ugly, just or unjust. But if we take that as final, we do not get real knowledge. The law of contradictions is right and valid in the physical world. When you are in ignorance, yes, the contradictions are valid. When two things are opposites in the same circumstance, same field, same time and same practical purpose, both cannot be right and valid. A great war, he is giving an example. A great war may be considered evil, but under other circumstances, it may be a great good and beneficial. It may allow the destruction of undesirables and permit new desirables to begin anew. No one man is entirely good or bad. All are a mixed bundle of contradictory features. Even in a single action or sentiment, it can happen. It's very interesting. When you do something sometimes and you are very, very observant of yourself, you will see that there is a mixture. Your motive, it may be a good motive, but the result also may not be very good, but you are accepting it. Okay, it's a mixture. So I'm saying very clearly, even in a single, action or sentiment, there can be a mixture of truth and falsehood. Life is full of opposite qualities, powers, values. Understanding can be correct if we view the relatives in the light of the absolute. We should not judge each thing separately, but in relation to all else. So what do we do? What can we do? If we are in the ignorance, so we are judging all the time. But we can temper the judgment. We can tone it down a little bit and say, yes, my judgment seems to be that this person is good, that person is bad. But I will suspend my ultimate judgment. I will proceed on the basis of my judgment here but I know very well that that's not the final truth. That's a humble way of proceeding when you are in the ignorance. There is no absolute justice, absolute truth, absolute good in the world. It cannot be possible. Srimdo says in the synthesis, nature will not even allow it because you are in the falsehood. Man is partial, superficial, limited in consciousness. Truth, justice, etc. can be glimpsed only by impartiality if we can go beyond superficialities and mere appearances. The relatives are only trying to express very imperfectly the absolute. There is a connection between the physical world and the supreme reality. And that is the reason why everything in the physical world is a symbol of the higher reality. The essence of all relatives is not the indeterminate sum of all relatives. This does not explain anything because the absolute is more than the sum of all relatives. This also we discussed. When you think that the divine is stones plus trees plus animals plus man plus the universe, you don't get to God. He is something much more than that. Okay. So the seed does not explain the tree. The third term, the absolute, is more than the sum of all determinates and qualities and features. We may, on the other hand, follow the path of difference and distinction. That's what we read today. Okay. We may, on the other hand, follow the path of difference and distinction and refuse to look at the whole. That's what we normally do. And it is valid at our level. We then get uncompromising absolute concepts like good and evil, justice and injustice, truth and falsehood. These absolute contrary concepts may work in the world, but are invalid for divine workings. Human reason is justified in refusing to attribute final value to one-sided contraries. But it is equally justified in not accepting an artificial and unharmonized collection of contraries. It must find their real harmonizing truth in the absolute. This is what he's saying. A very cheap and shallow optimism. Oh, God is there everywhere and everything is perfect. What you're seeing is not all right. That is not the way to look at things. That is, you are avoiding the reality of the lower level. It may be relative, but you have to see that. Okay? So this completes the paragraph, and now we can go to the next paragraph. We cannot either. So one of you has to read. The only three of you are there. So Archana, you can read.
Shall I read?
Okay, I'm reading.
Yes, you can. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
We cannot either. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay. We cannot either effect a reconciliation or explanation of the original contradictions of existence by taking refuge in a concept of time. Time, as we know or conceive it, is only our means of realizing things in succession. It is a condition and cause of conditions, varies on different planes of existence, varies even for beings on one and the same plane. That is to say, it is not an absolute and cannot explain the primary relations of the absolute. They work themselves out in detail by time and seem to a mental and vital being to be determined by it. But that seeming does not carry us back to their sources and principles. We make the distinction of conditioned and unconditioned, and we imagine that the unconditioned became conditioned, the infinite became finite at some date in time, and may cease to be finite at some other date in time, because it so appears to us in details. Particulars, sorry, because it so appears to us in details, particulars, or with regard to this or that system of things. But if we look at existence as a whole, we see that infinite and finite coexist and exist in and by each other. Even if our universe were to disappear and reappear rhythmically in time, as was the old belief, that too would be only a large detail and would not show that at a particular time all condition ceases in the whole range of infinite existence, and all being becomes the unconditioned. At another, it again takes on the reality or the appearance of conditions. The first source and the primary relations lie beyond our mental divisions of time, in the divine timelessness, or else in the indivisible or eternal time of which our divisions and successions are only figures in a mental experience.
Again, he is explaining on time. Okay, this time is very interesting because he's saying something very fantastic. He's saying that as you grow in consciousness from one level to another level, time also goes on changing. Okay, so this is very interesting because when you go to the spiritual level of the even the higher mind, the self, the Brahman, there is no time. It becomes something static. Immutability, that's why it was saying immutability. The mutability goes on in the physical world, but your consciousness has gone out of your body-mind life. Your body-mind life is in the physical world, but your soul, your consciousness has gone out and it is now in the immutable consciousness. It is like you are up in the sky and you are hovering in the sky, and there is, even the hovering is wrong because there is no movement there, and you are looking at the physical world, all movement, including your body-mind life, which seems to be going on by itself. Okay? So this is what he's saying. Time changes. But now he's saying something fantastic. He's saying that even in the physical world or in any world, time is something that relates to the individual. Okay? It can be different for you and it can be different for me. Just see, we are all there, and mother also has a physical body and she is in the physical world. But she is experiencing time in a totally different way because her consciousness is fixed in the self or even beyond the self. Okay? So that goes on changing. The time is very relative thing. So there are two things we can do. I can read the summary first and then we'll go back to the. I'll do that. We'll read the summary of what he's saying. It helps. It helps because then we know the gist of what he's saying. Then we go back to the sentences because there also the details are very interesting. No? So he's saying here the contradictions and differences exist in the temporal world, and therefore their reconciliation cannot be found in time. So long as you're in the physical world, there is time and space, and you cannot find their reconciliation. Time is the field of succession of events. One by one, events occur. They don't for you. They don't occur altogether. But when you rise in consciousness, you see it as a picture. You see the past, present, and future in the same time, simultaneously. And that is we call as drishti, but not to us. We see time in a sequence. Time is a sphere of conditions, relations. Time itself varies on different planes of consciousness. Time varies for different individuals, even on the same plane of existence. That's the interesting part. That is to say that time is not an absolute and cannot explain the primary relations of the absolute. What are the primary relations? Saguna, Nirguna, one and the many, conditioned and the unconditioned, status and dynamis. Okay? All these exist, coexist, and are complementaries in the supermind and the overmind. They are not contraries there, but they become opposites in the physical world in the field of time and dynamism. To our body, life, mind, the many seem to have come out of the one at some point of time. We think that the divine has manifested the physical world and there must have been a start to it. This is also a very interesting thing in the science also. We'll come back to that. Similarly, the conditioned has come out of the unconditioned. And again, at some point of time, they may disappear into their source, but that is not so. Both exist simultaneously and in each other and by each other. What are each other? Spirit and matter, the superconscious and the inconscient. It was thought that the universe appears and disappears rhythmically. But even that does not mean that in the appearance only the relatives exist and the disappearance only in the absolute exists. But this is not so. They are simultaneous, okay, and complementary. Their reconciliation lies not in time, but the divine timelessness and eternal time. This is what he's saying in the paragraph. So we go back to the beginning of the paragraph. It's very interesting. If you go into details, we'll see what it is. This time business is something very interesting, as I've told you, in the Bermuda Triangle. Okay, a whole plane. Okay, it's a very interesting thing. That's why I repeat. Okay, a whole plane can suddenly vanish from the radar screen. Why? Because it's not there in the physical world anymore. It is there in the vital world, and time is slow there. So when you come back into the physical world, you have saved a little bit of time, and that is verified, because the flight that takes 1 hour, you see that when you have landed in the airport of the other side, you have saved 15 minutes, and even fuel is saved. So that's a very interesting thing. Okay, but it's a complicated thing. And when you may believe, you may not be able to believe that the physical can become subtle. But if you consider very carefully, you will see that that's happening every day. Okay, take ice, it becomes water. It has gone from one state to another state, and that water also can be boiled and it can become water vapor. So if it is possible for water to take all the 3 states being the same, then why can't it happen with solid things also? And that is exactly what happens, but we find it a mystery. Okay, it's happening all the time. So now I read the sentence by sentence in each para. We have the time. We have about 15 minutes. We cannot either effect a reconciliation or explanation of the original contradictions of existence by taking refuge in our concept of time. When we are in time, we cannot explain these contradictions. They are there and they cannot be explained. Both are there. Falsehood is there, truth is there. Okay? As we said, light is there, darkness is there. But you cannot explain that. Only when you go to the higher level you can understand. Understanding intellectually is not the thing. You have to actually feel it and sense it concretely. Time, as we know or conceive it, is only our means of realizing things in succession. It's a condition and cause of conditions. It is time that gives cause and effect. The cause and effect is there in the physical world only, okay, in time. Okay. The karma. Again, you come back to the same idea. The law of karma operates in the physical world. Whatever you do has an effect. And that's why there is cause of conditions. Okay. Everything is caused and it has a result. But if you go to the higher level of consciousness, this law of karma becomes loosened. It doesn't apply that much. That is the reason why when your soul comes out of the body-mind life and goes to the higher level of consciousness, okay, the law of karma is abrogated for you. It is no more valid. You are free. That's why they call it mukti, moksha. You are not subject to the law of karma anymore. The body-mind life continues because at the physical level, cause and effect are there. Okay. So it's a condition and cause of conditions. Varies on each planes of existence. Varies even for beings on one and the same plane. Okay. So for everybody it is different. That is to say, it is not an absolute and cannot explain the primary relations of the absolute. They work themselves out in detail by time and seem to our mental and vital being to be determined by it. In the physical world, everything is determined by time. But That seeming does not carry us back to our sources and principles. Our source is the cause of everything, the third level. We make the distinction of conditioned and unconditioned, and we imagine that the unconditioned became conditioned, the infinite became finite at some date in time. This is what science also was wondering, and you know that probably that they calculated because it was that Stephen Hawking, that man who is absolutely a cripple, but his mind is supposed to be very highly advanced intellectual capacity. So there he says that he calculated because he's saying that the universe is expanding. That's funny, no? The physical universe is expanding because the physical world is subject to the law of dynamism and action. So it's not static. The stars are moving, everything is moving, and they are expanding. Even if you look at the night sky, they seem to be all static. But they are expanding, they are going outwards and in the speed. So when you calculate that speed, okay, you can think of it, oh, it is going at that speed. So if I do reverse engineering, okay, I can start calculating when it all began from a point. Okay. So they come to 14 billion years. But that is not correct what Sydney is saying. That is not so at all. It is both are there together at the same time. Universe was created out of time. It is in the timeless that the universe was created. It has always been there together with the superconscious and the inconscient have always existed together. In our thinking, we can think that no, there was a starting point. But there is no starting point because both are eternal. So, but if we look at existence as a whole, we see that infinite and finite coexist and exist in and by each other. This is the famous sentence. The seed contains the tree, and the tree also contains the seed. Not only one seed, 100,000 seeds. Even if our universe were to disappear and reappear rhythmically in time, as was the old belief, okay, that too would only be a large detail and would not show that at a particular time all condition ceases in the whole range of infinite existence and all being becomes the unconditioned. At another, it again takes on the reality of the appearance of conditions. In other words, when you get your liberation and your spiritual experience of the Brahman consciousness or the self, you have come out and you see that you are in an unconditioned state. The unconditioned state is the immutable and the featureless. No features at all. The features are actually conditioning and limiting you. But there when you go, there are no features and no limitations at all. You are free of all things. So, become the end. This first source and primary relations lie beyond our mental divisions of time, in the divine timelessness, or else in the indivisible or eternal time, of which our divisions and successions are only figures in a mental experience. So when you go from level 1 to, which is the normal experience of multiplicity and ignorance, when you go to level 2, you are in a static condition. But even that does not explain everything. You have to go to the third level and everything becomes harmonized. That's what Sri is saying. We have 10 minutes more. So we can read the next para. Archana they read. So the next one, either Sunki or Yasmin. Let Yasmin read today because she will be going out and she won't participate. So Yasmin, you read today.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Sunki, sorry.
Can you hear me?
No, no problem.
Yeah. There we see.
There we see that all needs and all principles, all persistent realities of existence For the finite as a principle of being is as persistent as the infinite, stand in a primary relation to each other in a free, not an exclusive unity of the absolute, and that the way they present themselves to us in a material or mental world is only a working out of them in secondary, tertiary, or yet lower relativities. The absolute has not become the contrary of itself and assumed at a certain date real or unreal relativities of which it was originally incapable. Nor has the one become a miracle, the many, nor the unconditioned deviated into the condition, nor the qualified sprouted out into quality. These oppositions are only the conveniences of our mental consciousness, are divisions of the indivisible. The things they represent are not frictions, they are really realities, but they are not rightly known if they are set in irreconcilable opposition or opposition to or separation from each other. For there is no such irreconcilable opposition or separation of them in the all view of the absolute. This is the weakness not only of our scientific divisions and metaphysical distinctions, but of our exclusive spiritual realizations, which are only exclusive because to arrive at them, we have to start from our limiting and dividing mental consciousness. We have to make the metaphysical distinctions in order to help our intelligence towards a truth which exceeds it, because it is only so that it can escape from the confusion of our first undistinguishing mental view of things. But if we bind ourselves to them in the end, we make change of what should only have been first held. We have to make use too of distinct spiritual realizations which may at first seem contrary to each other, because as mental beings it is difficult or impossible for us to seize at once largely and completely what is beyond our mentality, but we err if we intellectualize them into soul truths, as when we assert that the impersonal must be the ultimate realization and the rest creation of Maya, or declare the Saguna, the divine in all qualities, to be that and thrust away the impersonality from our spiritual experience. We have to see that both these realizations of the great spiritual seekers are equally valid in themselves, equally invalid against each other. They are one and the same reality experienced on two sides, which are both necessary for the full knowledge and experience of each other and of that which they both have. So it is with the one and many, the finite and the infinite, the transcendent and the cosmic, the individual and the universal. Each is the other as well as itself, and neither can be entirely known without the other, and without exceeding the appearance of contrary oppositions.
Okay, so quite a big para. And today we don't have much time, so what we'll do is we will redo the summary, okay, and then next time we can go into detail if you find it necessary. So here in this para he is saying, there in the divine timelessness. One second. Yeah. There in the divine timelessness, all contraries meet and become complementaries. There are no more contraries. There they stand in primary relations. That means they are very much related to each other. There is not an exclusive unity, an inseparable oneness. It's a synthesis of seeming contraries. Refer to the triple set of the supermind, where he says that there are three levels of the supermind. One is the oneness, and the other is the beginning of the multiplicity, and the third is the multiplicity more prominent than the oneness. I repeat that just to remind you of what he said earlier. So, refer to the triple status of the supermind. The supermind is not the Unitarian consciousness. The Unitarian consciousness is the transcendent, where only the divine exists and not the physical world. But the supermind is not that. The supermind is both. It contains the transcendent as well as the cosmos in seed form. Down the scale of consciousness, differentiation grows and multiplies itself infinitely into secondary, tertiary relations, etc. See the note on primary relations on page 400, same para. Okay, we have to understand what he's saying, primary and secondary relations. It is the ignorant human mind that sees differences and dualities. Note that in the self, dualities disappear and the oneness begins to reveal itself. Gold and the gold ornaments. That is the example. When you are in the physical world, you see the gold ornaments. You see necklaces, you see armlets, you see earrings, nose rings, and you recognize them to be more real than the gold. But when you go to the higher level of consciousness, you see that they are all gold essentially. I can actually all melt them down to gold, and that is the essence. So the multiplicity is the superficial aspect of looking at things. And when you go to the higher level, you see the oneness of things. The gold and the gold ornaments is a good example of that. These opposites are the convenience of the mental consciousness in the physical world. You want opposites in the physical world, otherwise there's confusion. The problem of seeing oppositions is not just limited to our sensations. It exists in science, metaphysics, and even in spiritual experience. The oppositions, okay? In science, you have a static condition and a moving condition. You have the infinite and the finite, okay? In metaphysics also, and even in spiritual experience, you have the problem. If we stop at these contraries, we miss the truth. Man opposes Saguna to the Nirguna, the impersonal to the personal. Many philosophies say the divine is impersonal. There is no God, it's your imagination. That's what they say. Very, very openly they say that. Jiddu Krishnamurti, then also our Sadguru, and they all say that the impersonal is the only truth. But the personal, that was a big quarrel between Totapuri and Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna was saying personal is the only truth. And Totapuri was saying, no, the impersonal is the truth. And then with their interaction, both came to know the other aspect. Okay? That's an interesting story which we have repeated many times. The one to the many, each of these pairs are complementaries, explain and complete each other, exist in each other. Okay? So this is what he's saying. So we go back to that famous of Blake, William Blake. The finite and the infinite are involved in each other. Become. Okay? So we stop here today. 8:30.